It was dry all day, and I said to myself, well, I do feel like doing a video somewhat, but I'm not at optimal video feels quite yet. So I waited, and I waited, and I waited, and now I really feel like doing a video. But now it started raining, which means you're going to hear the rain on the window pane, unless I fudge with the audio, which I really don't feel like doing. So you're going to put up with the rain on the window pane. Hopefully it doesn't get really loud like it was a couple of seconds ago. I think it's simmering down. So it's very annoying. This has happened before where I think I want to do a video, but I'll wait a bit. I'll wait after I've had some coffee. And then I wait, and then something starts. Construction, rain, noises on next door. Let's just hope it gets nice and quiet from here on out, as it seems to be getting. So I may have vented for this for no reason, because yeah, it's actually not that bad right now. Okay, so what do I need to do as my prelude? That was one prelude, bitching about the rain. It wouldn't be a prelude if I didn't bitch about the conditions, right? The conditions with which I have to operate. I have to leave downtown, I really do. It's been way too long, and it's not conducive to video making at all, this place. Suburbs. I never thought I'd yearn to live in the suburbs, but I am really yearning to live in the suburbs. There's nothing I can do to insulate myself from all the noise. Not just when it comes to video making, but when it comes to trying to sleep, when it comes to trying to have peace, to concentrate, to write. Noise. That Schopenhauer, it wasn't a full chapter, but I think it was actually a full chapter. I re-listened to that, and it resonated so much more this time around. He really hated noise, and I tend to agree nowadays. So, what's going on? Prelude 2 is I bought a new laptop, and so I transferred a bunch of old files from the old laptop to the new one, and as you are wont to do when you get a new laptop. And among those files, it just struck me how many things I started either as write-ups or as audio recordings. Just how many things I started that are pretty damn good, but that went nowhere. I just full-on abandoned. You know, here I am thinking that I've got these dozen or so drafts in my blog that I will eventually return to and start doing again, right? So drafts that I can easily access on the blog. But little did I know that I've had a whole bunch of other things that hadn't even made it to draft form or as video in progress form that I just blanked on. And they're really good, and there's a lot of them. And it's just kind of depressing how, it's possible, how this is even possible that someone like me, who I tend to think I have good focus, but even I get distracted, so distracted, to the point where really insightful commentary that, it's like 10 minutes too, and I've got this stupid idea that videos need to be really long, at least 30 minutes or more, and so something that I record, and that probably can work as just a standalone short upload, I think, no, this is just the intro to the video, and I will return to the video a bit later in a few days, and it'll be a really good long hour rant or something like that. And it's like, no, this could have been uploaded on the day that I recorded it, but I just abandoned it because I think that everything needs to be really long. How did I get that stupid idea spun into my head? So that's Prelude 2. I'll hopefully if it's applicable to what I'm doing here in this video, then I will tack it on at the end of this response that I'm planning to do now. Planning to respond to Richard Wolff, who did a just atrocious video on Meritocracy, and I'm going to play it, so I'm not even going to introduce it or anything like that, but is it just a polite disagreement, or is it something more? I think it's because everything that leads him astray, it can be reduced to that simple bent he has to oversell his ideas about why capitalism is bad, and then to downplay the problems with replacing it in the ways he wants to replace it. Because if he wasn't so driven by that, he would make all these really basic mistakes he's making. Or maybe they're not mistakes. Maybe he knows he's oversimplifying this, and he just doesn't care. That's something that you can assess and write in the comments. But now let's just get underway and play some of this. It's a 6-minute, 37-second video, and yeah, I've got some recordings about Richard Wolff that are over a year old now, that I just abandoned. So I'll tack those on at the end of this, and I'll tack on some other stuff at the end of this, because it shouldn't go to waste. And I've got this sped up by 1.5, so he's going to be talking really fast, so enjoy that. And yeah, so it's on meritocracy, and it was painful.
This is a response to people who imagine that we live in a meritocracy, or worse still, who believe that meritocracy actually exists, that we can rank human beings a little bit like we rank potatoes, grade A.
Now, what percent of people who are, let's say, content with the status quo, or not even content, but who wouldn't want to drastically overturn the status quo, they just want to tinker with it and stuff like that, what percent do you think have actually convinced themselves that we've achieved perfect meritocracy, or that we're even hovering around meritocracy? See, I would think that it's probably a minority, and the reason it feels like it's a majority is because we're all plagued by sample bias, because a guy like Jordan Peterson talks as if meritocracy is in existence, and he's very popular online. He's probably very popular offline too. And so because someone like him, like the figurehead of meritocracy, is already in existence, because someone like him is popular to that extent, we tend to think, oh, that must mean that all these people, if you ask them point blank, they'd say resounding yes to the existence of meritocracy right now. But honestly, I think if you actually brought it to Peterson, actually asked him point blank, have we achieved perfect meritocracy, or are we a couple of degrees away from achieving it? I think he would say no, there's a long way to go. It's just in the middle of a debate especially, he gets worked up and he makes some flimsy statements about how if you're in a high-ranking position, it must be because you've outcompeted all your competitors. But I'm confident if you actually ask him point blank about the power of nepotism, cronyism, connections, the sort of college admission scandal we saw earlier in the year, he wouldn't deny any of that. And he wouldn't downplay it and pretend that it's not pervasive, fairly pervasive. It's not universal, but it is pervasive. So that's my first issue with this. He's making it out as if the system that he opposes, if you believe in that system, or maybe not even believe in it, but if you aren't as eager as he is to do away with it and make fairly radical replacement type implementations, that is proof in itself that you believe in meritocracy as something that's already been around the block for decades. And I would be very surprised if the people who do believe that also believe that we've achieved this meritocracy. No, the debate about meritocracy should always be framed as aspirational meritocracy. Is aspirational meritocracy something we want to strive for, or is it something that even in principle we want to reject for something else? But what exactly? I don't know. Let's see.
Grade B, grade C, and therefore know which is the better potato and which isn't, which is the better person and which isn't, and therefore we can get...
You know what? Maybe this is too fast. I should slow him down. Oh shit, I had him at 1.75, not 1.5. Oops. Let's go back a bit.
And therefore know which is the better potato and which isn't, which is the better person and which isn't,
no,
and therefore we can give through the better person the better reward. And
I want to pause. Not who is the better person, but who is the better worker in a given line of work. Doesn't have to reflect anything outside the vocation. So that's, I guess, strike two.
we can give through the better person the better reward, and it's all fairsies, squaresies, as if we were playing some sort of game. But we aren't. And
in what society, pre-capitalist, or some parallel to capitalism that has existed in recent decades, in what society have they not done precisely that, given the bigger reward to the individual in a particular line of work who outperforms the competition? Because listen to this, listen to the implication that's not fully stated, but in a very sneaky, vague way put out there, that it's bad to give the bigger reward to the person who outperforms the competition.
We can give through the better person, the better reward, and it's all fairsies, squaresies, as if we were playing some sort of game.
But again, aspirational meritocracy, step by step, if that is actually the case, if the person does reveal himself to be the best person for the job, so he's using the fact that right now it's still in that aspirational status and we haven't gotten there, it's really sinister. He's using that as a sort of smokescreen to argue against the aspiration itself. It's very tedious because no one's called him out on it in the comment section.
But we aren't. And capitalism may want to rank you, but you are an individual. You have unique talents, skills, passions, interests, and not only are you different from other people.
Many people do. Some people really don't. I've spoken with many such people. They really are just wall-to-wall shithead.
People in that way. And capitalism may want to rank you, but you are an individual. You have unique talents, skills, passions, interests, and not only are you different from other people in that way, but those differences change over time. You define new passions, you develop new interests, new skills. Either the system deals with that, or it doesn't. Here's what a healthy economic system would do. It would spend a lot of time, it's called education, finding and nurturing those parts of you that are passionate, that are open to learning, that are interested in mastering certain skills, certain aptitudes, and so on.
So he just said that this is what a healthy economic system would do. But then he went on to talk about something that the Department of Education should change. The Department of Education is a political process. Right? To the extent that you want to change it, you have to go through a political process change. Divorced entirely from changing something about the nation's economic system. I know that there is this, everything is interconnected and you can't deal with anything in a standalone way, and that is, again, another one of these ideas that's not merely something that I would politely disagree with and maintain some modicum of respect. No, I think this is a pathology when they try to pretend that everything is interconnected. Because we have seen things, when special interest groups focus on a particular thing, when they push at it hard enough, they change that specific thing and nothing else. When you are persistent enough, you can change it. If people wanted to augment education through the Department of Education, and they focused on it in a laser-sharp sort of way, and they had enough of a coalition to push them and to make it a wedge issue, they could change it without changing a goddamn single economic policy. Who would disagree with that? It's happened so many times in recent history, let alone throughout the course of human civilization. I'll go back a bit. Don't want to interrupt him too much. I want to have him have the full sentences.
Those parts of you that are passionate, that are open to learning, that are interested in mastering certain skills, certain aptitudes, and so on. And then it would intelligently match those things that are strong in you with what the society needs. Why? Because that will get for the whole community the best out of you. And it will.
And every single person, right? See the other implication that's unstated, but it's just sort of hovering out there. Every single person will be interested in something that the entire community will have a need. Where's the evidence of that? In my experience, polar opposite. Adrenaline junkies, daredevils, right? Like the parkour phenomenon. Look up some parkour videos. That doesn't serve the community in any single way. It's an entertainment for certain people who tend to like things that make their heart pound faster. And there's a lot of interests like this. So what are you going to do? Should that sort of adrenaline junkie be, should we subsidize their passions, interests, preferences? Or should we just say, at some point, you're on your own? See, I believe there's a fairly large segment of the population. I can't predict, I'm not going to try to guess exactly what it is, but probably varies region to region, whose the things they're most passionate about and would like to make a living from doing actually don't serve the community whatsoever. It's just entertainment, and it's probably going to be the sort of thing that might caused the healthcare system to balloon in costs. Like parkour is the ultimate example, something like that. And then forget about the insurance claims, all that. And so should we subsidize that just because that is their honest-to-God raw passion? And they're not much interested in anything else. So if you make this sort of pitch, I would like to take it seriously, and I'm not writing off that we should actually augment the Department of Education. There's so much wrong about it. I've done videos on education. The fact that we group students by age as opposed to by psychological disposition and cognitive style, and the fact that we pretend there are no different learning methods, and that these learning methods are not going to coincide with different age by grades. They're going to probably, if anything, they're going to coincide with psychological profiles. So like there's just two things right off the bat that you want to fixate on first and foremost if you want to change education. But if you want to go beyond that and try to do a tailor everyone's preferences and make everyone's preferences something that they can learn about hands-on in the school system, then I just want a list of acceptable preferences and unacceptable ones. And if parkour is on your list of acceptable preferences that people should learn about so that they can master that craft starting in elementary school, just put that on your list and I'll call you a crank and be done with it. But it's very easy to make this sort of speech. The hard thing to do is to actually filter out the acceptable preferences that we should subsidize in a sort of hands-on way and teach people about, from the ones that should just be considered too unproductive and probably counterproductive. Dangerous not only to the individual safety, but to the sort of people who are just walking next to a building and then have someone fall right next to them because they were doing parkour. Sorry to hang on the parkour example, but there's a lot of stuff like this that just, I've spoken to people, that's what they're interested, and it's monomaniacal. They're not interested in much of anything else. And to pretend that everyone's got a little angel in them, and that if you just get to that little angel, you will unveil a societally productive interest, that's utopianism. Oh, but I'm talking to a Marxist, or I'm responding to a Marxist, so of course it's utopianism.
Give each of us the satisfaction of knowing that we're making an important contribution with something that also excites and pleases and moves us individually.
Awesome. Give me a list of things that should be on the table and a list of things that are off the table. But without doing that, this whole video is utterly useless.
That would be best. We don't do that. We don't spend the time or the energy. We don't provide the funds to our schools to find in each individual the type of...
But subsidizing education has actually spiked in the last few decades, and it hasn't actually decreased conformity or anything like that. So I don't even know if you can make a one-to-one comparison. Like the more we defund education, the more conformity you're going to get in society. Nah, there's deeper causes to that. Probably apolitical, probably mostly cultural.
They have to develop those capabilities, to give them the ability to change and adjust as their passions and their age and their experience lead them in new directions. We don't do that. Instead, we take a cheap shorthand. We say to a student, quickly, do some things. Here they are, an exam, a paper, whatever, and now we're going to give you an A or a B or a C.
There should still be a role for that. It shouldn't be the whole story, but it should not be scrapped with. Right? Another implication, right? The problem with grading students. Maybe grading shouldn't be the whole freaking story, but to me, this implies that his ideal system would do away with grades.
Or whatever. It doesn't reflect you because you are a complicated reality that has to be evaluated over time with lots of exposure, with different people participating, so it isn't one person's decision. What we have are schools that make each student try to please the teacher because that's how you get the good grade. To please whatever the test is.
That's how you get the good grade. I am sure that is the case. In some cases, I've seen it. But to the extent that it happens, from what I've seen, it happens as the exception. The brown-nosing approach to getting on the honor roll is the exception and not the rule. I'd love to hear other people's experiences. If anyone who's watching this has actually seen that the rule is that the brown-nosers, who, were it not for their brown-nosing, would have actually got much shittier grades, and brown nosing is what made all the difference, whether you're talking elementary school, high school, post-secondary. If your experience differs from mine, and it's the rule, whereas the actual competent students didn't make it on the honor roll because they didn't brown nose, if your experience is just total reverse from mine, let me know, because every time I ask colleagues, friends, acquaintances, their experience matches up with mine. There are brown nosers. No one should deny that it works on some teachers, but it doesn't work on the majority of teachers. His implication right there is not only that it works as a general rule, he's not only generalizing this, he is talking as if it's something that can be universalized. He's universalizing brown nosing as a strategy for getting the best grade and then presumably getting the best job. Let's keep playing. I think he makes that as his next point.
To build this on that so you can get the good grade, which gets you to the next level, and so you can get the good grade there. We teach to the grades, we learn to the grades, and we produce people who have good grades but may not know anything. Einstein got bad grades in math and physics. What happened? He didn't conform to what the teachers of his time wanted. Had they spent the time, they would have discovered the genius in him. There is genius in all of us.
That's a diamond in the rough. It doesn't mean there's genius in all of us.
It's only at the time they would have discovered the genius in him. There is genius in all of us.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to standard, because he needs to say this. This needs to be played in normal speed, because what he just said is just it's scandalous.
They would have discovered the genius in him. There is genius in all of us.
Not most of us. Not 2/3 of us. Not 50%. No. There's genius in all of us. When you make videos that are scripted, accessible to a fairly large audience, he's got himself a pretty decent following, you're going to want to go easy on the poetic speak, because there's a lot of people who take you seriously. Maybe this is supposed to be taken maybe he literally meant there's genius in all of us. It's not just optimism about the human condition, it's hyper optimism. It is gratuitously hyper optimistic about what humans are. Why? Because he is obsessed with capitalism, and he'll throw anything, including the kitchen sink, so as to make it seem as if capitalism is ruining people, is getting in the way of people's ability to show their true genius. Forget the fact that pre-capitalism, majority of people were unexceptional. Not just that it's not just that they were a few degrees shy of geniuses. No, they were fucking unexceptional. Centuries before capitalism, it's going to happen centuries after capitalism. Regardless of what you have in effect, most people will be unexceptional. It's not a problem with the system. It's a problem with the fact that being exceptional is, well, this is the word states, it's the exception, it's not the rule.
It's only a question of whether we have the nurturance, the time, and the support to do it. We don't. That's it.
To have that, what do you need? Drum roll. I need a drum roll. To have that, what do you need? You need a basic income scheme. Let them play them again.
And it's only a question of whether we have the nurturance, the time, and the support to do it.
Well, time is the big one in that one. And what gets you more time? Not having to work. Not having to live paycheck to paycheck. And balance work in the meantime. Basic income schemes. Earned income tax credit. Negative income tax. Citizens' dividend. Stuff Henry George was writing about back in the 19th century. You think he was in any way aligned with your economic ideology and all the changes you want to see? Far from it. But he advocated all these things that would be conducive to citizens having far more time with which to, as you said yourself, let me play you again.
It's only a question of whether we have the nurturance, the time, and the support to do it.
Right, so the time, the other two are mostly a reflection of how rich your personal life is. It doesn't have much to do with the political system, support, nurturance, where you have people pushing you and being cheerleaders for you, and you can do it no matter what. I guess that sort of stuff works on many people, so that sort of private support is a different animal. But time, definitely, and basic income schemes, things that like you really are opposed to. This is why you shit on Andrew Yang so frequently, and really anyone who would pacify the populace with a basic income scheme, because when you pacify them, then they're okay enough and they don't want to revolt, and you kind of do want to have them revolt because you're obsessed with the system, that obsessed with it. And you sort of have to be, because you're something of a historicist. You may deny you're a historicist, but I would say anyone who uses the term late-stage capitalism or late-stage anything, well, how is that not an indication that the person believes in laws of history? Right? Historicism, attributing meaningful significance to history and the belief that it has a certain kind of directionality and it unfolds inexorably and all this stuff. Anytime you hear someone say that late stage something, usually late stage capitalism, no, you're talking to someone who believes in pretty much magical unfoldings of events. Unfoldings that are destined to be certain ways, and that history is not just a bunch of shit that happens, and no, it has to be a certain directional aspect to it. And he's one of those. So I don't know if he self-identifies as a historicist, but this much emphasis on ending capitalism, like it's not just something that maybe can improve things. No, it's the magic bullet, baby. Yeah, that's the historicism 101. It has to be. There has to be a next stage. It's like a fucking intellectual tick with these people. Everything. His videos on immigration, rounded off to problem with capitalism. Any dilemma, and rounded off to a problem with capitalism. It's pathological. So anyway, I'll play him again, because I forgot what he was saying. All right, he was saying the three big ingredients, two of which have nothing to do with politics, but he makes it seem as if they're political. Time, yes, we definitely can give people more time, but that's like people centuries ago have been writing about ways to get there. Stuff like citizens' dividend. Give them payments in the form of dividends, and the richer the country is in natural resources, the more the citizens will get. But it is one hell of an argument against overpopulation, because obviously the more people you have, the less each person's going to get in the way of dividends. So it's one often neglected argument against having more and more people, is that these resource-rich countries, but I guess it's especially applicable to resource-poor countries. But even in resource-rich countries, like, yeah, the amount you get in your dividend is going to be less per person. Sorry for the tangent, but I think it's actually, there's a lot of these good arguments against overpopulation that have nothing to do with climate change or anything in that ecology department. And I hate that deep ecologists are the ones who are often making the arguments against overpopulation, because that's most of the debunkings is against the ecologists. But there's just so many other fantastic arguments, like the 80-20 rule, for instance. A tangent within a tangent is what I just did. Jesus fucking Christ. I'm on fire.
In all of us. It's only a question of whether we have the nurturance, the time, and the support to do it. We don't.
Mostly personal shortcomings, or the fact that, well, interesting people are kind of ostracized because people like social grace, and when you like social grace, you tend to avoid people who are negative. But the negative people are usually the most interesting people. So the negative people are sort of isolated. They don't have support. They don't have nurture in the way of their private life. So yeah, they don't have that sort of effect. They're authentic, and authenticity is not exactly in. But you're not going to talk about any of those obstacles. You're going to talk about the political obstacle, which is the all-encompassing obstacle. Well, no, the political one has to do with time. Yes, people are crunched on time. It totally fucks over the whole idea of actually having them be informed civic agents. You're not going to do it when they have to work 40 hours a week, when they're encouraged to start families, all this stuff. So yes, I'm all for giving people more time, but you got to do it through a basic income scheme, which you oppose. because you're afraid it'll pacify people.
That's a tragedy of the American economic system and of its education system.
The American system is not that unique. If you want to point to a uniquely tragic system that molds people to be hyper-conformist, look to China and a lot of that Asian model style economics. They don't call it Tiger Mom for no fucking reason.
But then the question arises, if that's true, if our individuality is systematically squelched by being ordered in a rank...
By historical standards? Really? Like, I'm all for putting less emphasis on grades, but that's not, the way this is sounding, it's not where he wants to stop it at.
A, B, C, D. Well, then why does that persist? Especially in a country that pretends, at least, that it's committed to the individual, to the unique differences we all have, etc., etc.
Well, the big joke is that it pretends it's culturally individualistic. And that's where I would actually make the strongest critique, at the non-economic cultural level, because it's very culturally conformist, even though it has these 11 or so different cultures, but within those cultures people conform to their social group. But he wants to use economic, like the existence of the fact that a workforce has to abide by certain rules, and you have to be a highly trained professional. Yeah, you're gonna have to be a highly trained professional, and there are certain jobs that are just gonna suck no matter what system you come up with. There are certain, or just dangerous jobs. Who's gonna want to do, if they have an option to do something creative that's non-dangerous? If everyone has that option, I highly doubt that you're going to have anyone who'll be doing the dangerous jobs, which for at least another decade or so, we're still going to need humans to do. But just listen to this.
Especially in a country that pretends, at least, that it's committed to the individual, to the unique differences we all have, etc., etc.
Can't you grant that at least in some professions, people do need to leave their individuality at the door? And this idea of shitting on meritocracy and even portraying meritocracy as interchangeable with capitalism, that itself, I haven't even gotten around to the problem with that. It's not synonymous with capitalism. A good chunk of the capitalist economy has nothing to do with merit. It has to do with whimsical needs, right? Consumer goods are still a fairly large portion of the capitalist economy. And those, even in non-capitalist economies, those should be handled by market mechanisms. Like, who here, even his ideological cohorts who are arguing for a modified 21st century socialism, yeah, they want central planning for maybe a few things like natural monopolies, but a lot of them that I've been listening to, they're perfectly happy to grant that, yeah, market mechanisms for all consumer goods. So obviously, people will be drawn to certain products and not others, just as people will be drawn to certain types of performers and not others. So if I am, let's say we implement everything that he's advocating for, starting in elementary school, lasting all the way through post-secondary, it's still the case that people who are going to excel the most, regardless of what you do to mold them to begin with, people who are going to excel the most are going to be people who are monomaniacal. Right? I wanted to be a professional hockey player once upon a time. I wanted to be a professional tennis player once upon a time, a few years later. I wanted to be a professional debater / rhetorician a few years after that. I wanted to be a professional author yet a few years after that. I didn't achieve any of those things. Why? Because I wasn't willing to sacrifice all my other interests that have nothing to do with that aren't even tangentially related to, let's say, any of those 4 individual ones. Right? I didn't want to give all that up. But when you truly want to excel and get to the point where you will be in demand to such a point where you will become a pro, then you really do have to give up on a lot of these other things. And you have to be just tunnel vision. You have to be a type of tunnel vision person. And that's a trade-off that everyone's going to have to make no matter what kind of a system, economic system you have in, and no matter what kind of an education you receive. You will have to outcompete people who are just as obsessed with that given profession. Let's say some sort of a pro athlete type thing. the people you're going to be competing with, they're not going to be jack of all trades. They're not going to have a wide range of interests. So not only does his endpoint have nothing to do with the economic system, any economic policy, it doesn't even have anything to do with education per se. Because we all make terrible trade-offs. I made the trade-off. I said, you know what? Yeah, I kind of want to be all these things, but I'm not going to devote my life to acquiring, to perfecting my craft in any of these specific domains. Because I'm just way too interested in other random shit. And if that means I don't get to be a pro ever, fair fucking game. If that means I'm going to have a job that's going to annoy me more often than not, fair fucking game. I'd rather put up with that than sacrifice a bunch of other interests so as to attain excellence and perfection in one line of work. How is anything he's proposing going to change that? Are you going to make everyone have really pluralistic interests? Are you going to regiment how much time they can spend on any given thing so that they can truly excel at one particular thing? Because to the extent that some people do excel at one particular thing and suck at everything else, they can still be very much in demand. The best musicians in the world, very much in demand. They probably don't know much of anything else other than music. Shaquille O'Neal, if I may use a dated NBA player, right? Oh, actually, maybe that's a bad example because he didn't really have to practice. He was just big. Kobe Bryant, right? Excelled at basketball, didn't really excel a bunch of anything else. Now, let's say that you get elbowed out by Kobe Bryant and by people who are that fucking good. Your dream was to be an NBA player. But you didn't really try that hard. You wanted to do other stuff. And so your dream was broken. Whose fault is it? It's not your fault. You simply traded off one pursuit for a bunch of other pursuits. Is it the system's fault? Well, the system, let's just say the recruitment for NBA players. Is it their fault that they chose the best of the best? Is he suggesting that there will be no leagues like the NBA once we do away with capitalism? Well, that makes no sense. We got a whole bunch of non-capitalist societies and economies in the world right now, but they still partake in these global sports competitions and Olympics. So it's inescapable. The fact that some people are obsessed and competitive and they get those top-notch positions is nothing you can do to education or to economic policies to augment that. Unless you make monomania illegal. But then you probably have to augment psychologies as well.
Why rank people as though they were potatoes? Answer: it serves a...
You have a point, because some people do conflate achievement, occupational achievement, with social esteem. Now, to counter that, we need to talk about the culture. We don't need to talk about politics. We don't need to talk about economics. We need to segment these things. It's ultimately a cultural problem. But it's not anywhere near as big a cultural problem as you're making it out to be, because there have been a lot of critiques of that coming out. And when I see a critique of that, I see far more thumbs up than thumbs down. It's like a 99-to-1 ratio of thumbs up, thumbs down. So anytime this is given pushback, right, the idea that achievement and moneyed success is correlates with higher social esteem, when people push back against that, they get major applause. So we're getting better. It's not like the 1980s. He's making it out as if we're perpetually in the 1980s and everything's Wall Street, Wall Street, Wall Street. People are in love with the Wall Street types. No, they're not. In 2013, there was a fucking movie that took the piss out of the Wall Street guy, and people loved it. The movie didn't romanticize him. The movie showed him for the fucking dipshit that he was. That's why people loved the movie. But he was really rich. But he was the butt of a bunch of jokes. So yeah, we need to understand it's not fully done with. There are still some people that prize moneyed achievement and success and stuff like that. And it shouldn't reflect social esteem. But we can change even that last remaining chunk of the culture. We can do it. We keep making the same arguments. We can decimate that mentality. But it's got nothing to do with any policy. Education policy, political policy, economic policy, nothing. Apples and oranges. Stop doing apples and oranges. Pretty please.
Useful political function, etc. Why rank people as though they were potatoes?
Not people, workers.
Answer. It serves a useful political function. And that's the important thing about meritocracy and its insistence that it be used in our system.
So anytime he needs to go to the dentist, anytime he needs to go to the doctor, anytime he needs to get from one place to another, like a different state or a different country, right? So in that case, he will go to a pilot who is a highly trained professional and who's got a pilot license because he outcompeted a bunch of people who didn't get that license, right? There's a finite number of pilots in the world, and meritocracy says, that's all meritocracy says. There's a finite number of people in any given profession, and we're going to see to it that those who actually pass the bar are going to be those who show a superior knowledge, skill set, competence than their competition. That's all meritocracy is. It's a method of hiring, firing, and promoting. It's not perfect, but it can be. And we can aspire to it. So the moment you're talking about this subject, but you're not using words like hiring, firing, promoting practices, again, and it contradicts the way everyone lives. Because we don't go to people who don't have the license, who haven't passed the bar. If he's got a bug up his ass, like a literal bug up his ass, he'll go to a doctor who is actually licensed, who has been proven to be superior than the unlicensed guy who, whatever, failed his exam. So he doesn't like the exams, he doesn't like the grades, but he doesn't live out that way. No one does. I've discussed this meritocracy topic with so many people, and I always go back to, is it good that we have highly trained professionals? And they say, yes, that's good. Well, guess what? Meritocracy is simply a method of hiring, firing, and promoting based on that. We're not quite there yet, but we're there with certain professions. We're inching closer and closer to it. And the more competent, the better. But I think what the problem is now is you've got this, the moment anyone starts talking about competence, the baggage of Jordan Peterson crops up. Because Jordan Peterson, well, we know what his baggage is. We don't have to go over it now. When he gets caught up in the middle of a debate, he'll talk as if everyone who has ever been promoted has been promoted because they have shown a superiority to those who haven't gotten promoted. So he will exaggerate on the opposite end. But that doesn't mean we should throw the baby out with the bathwater and think, ooh, making a pro-competence argument, you must be making a pro-Peterson argument. No, I'm not making a pro-Peterson argument. Peterson is an exaggerator. Richard Wolff is a different type of exaggerator. I'm tired of exaggerators. So, whatever he needs. If he needs a service from a professional, he will actually seek out the professional. Every critic of meritocracy will do so. So how is it that their vision will make it so that these professionals are not going to be better than the other people? When you start talking, oh, you're grading people, you're saying some people are better than others. No, I'm saying some workers are better than others. And I think if you actually ask most of the people who failed, let's say someone was an aspiring doctor and failed, I think far more often than not they'll say, yeah, it's probably good because I didn't pass. It's probably good that I didn't end up doing that because, yeah, there's people better than me who should be doing that, right? So even the victims, he'll call them the victims. But I bet you, far more often than not, the victims will actually say, yeah, I tried, but I just wasn't smart enough for that, or I wasn't intense enough for that, or I found out that I didn't really like that much to put enough effort into it, and I wanted to focus on a bunch of things. And yes, focusing on a bunch of things is going to mean that you end up with a not so illustrious a job that's probably going to piss you off. And I made that decision, and I'm working with annoying people, a lot of corporate bullshit, a lot of paper pushing bullshit. But at the end of the day, I wouldn't have changed a damn thing. Because I like the balance in interests that sort of thing afforded me. And it's up to individuals to make that choice. Nothing that can be politicized.
Here's how it works. When you are fired from your job, or when you find yourself in a job that is boring, repetitive, oppressive, it never changes.
Yeah, so at least 30% of the time, that's how I feel at work. Probably more on a bad day. Yeah, but I'd rather still put up with that than have a sort of just waste my 20s just with my head buried in a book or a handful of books that are this dense and really ultimately about one field of study. No. I want to diversify my studies. And yeah, the consequence for that is... But again, how would the consequence for people like me be different in your system? When we're just interested in that many things so we can't attain excellence in any one given thing. You have to answer this question. If someone's supporting him, please answer this question for me. Right? Will it just be the case that excellence will not be something that's employable? Should we not employ excellence? To the extent that some people reach it closer than others? There's a hard price that people who pursue excellence have to pay. And that usually has to do with social shortcomings, intellectual shortcomings, to the extent that you want to be a well-rounded intellectual, especially now with over-specialization. It's like real price is being paid. But I'm still glad that some people are willing to pay it. From standard doctors all the way to neurosurgeons.
It doesn't give you the satisfactions or rewards you think you're entitled to, and that you're...
I don't think I'm entitled to it. I don't think a lot of people who do insufficient effort to get there and fail, I don't think they think they're entitled to it, because they're not running on this notion of Santa Claus politics. That's what I'm going to call you people. You guys are Santa Claus politics fanatics. You don't think in terms of trade-offs. You think in terms of, well, I'll let him finish.
Creativity could and would blossom if given the chance. We don't do that for most.
You can bolster creative people by giving them a, what did I say? Either citizens' dividend or basic income or something of that sort. Things you oppose. Why do you oppose it? Because it'll pacify the populace. You don't want the populace pacified because you want them to overthrow capitalism.
Most people. We fire them whenever the employer thinks it's profitable to do so.
Okay, so as powerful as labor unions are in BC, I'm not even going to use a labor union example to see just how difficult it is to fire people. Even people who have something that I guess just barely now passes as a disability. There's a colleague I have, he's got a bad lower back. He's not disabled, but he is on the disabled list. And the amount of horseshit he gets away with, just flat out refusal to do simple tasks. Convinced it's not part of his job description. You have to go to the ends of the earth to get management to start doing something, and they're all tiptoey as they're even approaching him. Tiptoey. Oh, because he's got a bad back, and he's technically on the disabled list. They are petrified. I know it's not the case in the States. A lot of states are right-to-work states, so it's very different here locally. But hey, at least I pointed out that it's certain ways in some regions. It's very difficult to fire people. In other regions, yeah, you can. You can fire people very easily. Depends on what pocket of the country, what pocket of the continent you're talking about. Will you hear anything like that from him? No, he's going to make it seem as though anyone can fire anyone for any reason at all times. Labor unions are all but non-existent. No, they're still very powerful, and even if they are decimated, disability rights groups, which should exist, but there are certain people who milk that. You got a bad lower back, you get on the disabled list, and then you get all sorts of protections, and then your employer is fucking pissing anytime they have to discipline you, let alone try to fire you or write you up or give you a last warning. I've fucking seen it. Don't downplay it. You're going to point out the examples in the right-to-work states. Point out the examples that are the opposite of it, that do exist.
We stick the vast majority of us in jobs we often hate. And when we wonder to ourselves, why? Here's where meritocracy...
Because I didn't want to waste away studying one domain. I wanted to study a bunch of domains, that's why.
Meritocracy enters. It's all your fault. You see,
Even if you regret it, you don't have to think in terms of self-blame and fault-finding. You can just regret the fact that, yeah, value is fungible. That's what it is. It's nothing to do with the system. It has to do with the fact that to get somewhere, a lot of things have to go right, and if only one goes wrong, the whole house collapses.
Don't have enough merit. Don't get angry at the system.
Yeah, the licensed doctor you probably saw numerous points in your life has more merit than the unlicensed doctor you chose to avoid.
For not having developed your skills, your genius, your creativity. Don't get angry at the system for sticking you in a job where you can't show them, you can't contribute, you can't give all that you have. Don't blame the system for providing you with no job at all. Or the choice.
Yeah, the system shouldn't really provide people with jobs. It should provide people with an ability to get by. And if they have something that they can work up, that they can impress their fellow, whatever, locals, or if they can put something online that impresses people, then on top of that, they can have the additional income that flows from that. But yeah, the right to work thing, or not the right, sorry, how did Andrew Yang put it? The government training programs and all, that was a colossal failure. I'll link to Andrew Yang going in depth about that. They tried that in the Midwest, and the results were just unimpressive, to say the least.
Between no job and an awful job. No. Blame yourself. You see, you don't have enough merit.
I would say to people who have failed to become professionals, if they're blaming themselves, they have to ask why. Either because they didn't devote enough time, effort to outcompete the best of the best, or they weren't smart enough. And in either of those cases, there's no reason for self-blame. Because they probably spend their time doing something decent, unless they're alcoholics or something. In that case, okay, fine, blame yourself. If you didn't achieve what you wanted to achieve in your career because you're an alcoholic, then blame yourself. If you spent your time just having fun, no, don't blame yourself then, even if you regret not having earned more money. And then if you're just not smart enough, there's no need to blame yourself. Probably blame your parents, because that's probably heritable to some extent, and whatever led that was in the environment in your early upbringing, or whatever other kind of nutrition deficiencies. So ultimately probably can be reduced to the parents and the caretakers. So in either of those two cases, there's no need to blame yourself. And yeah, there are some, let's not kid ourselves, there are some people who want a prestigious career, but they're just not smart enough. And it's no reason to blame oneself. And it's also not any reason to actually appoint them to very demanding, cognitively demanding lines of work just because it's their dream. No, I want my doctor to be the best of the best. Even if that means that someone who wanted to be a doctor doesn't get to be a doctor and is crushed. Yeah, I think if you did a poll on that, my opinion would be the near 100%. 99 percentile, we approve.
You didn't get the right grades, you didn't go to the right school, you didn't get the picture. It's a way the system has for failing the people in it and then blaming the victims of a failed system.
So talk that talk. Just go to unlicensed people for your otherwise licensed professional services. Just random guy off the block who wanted to be a pilot but just didn't go to the right school, didn't go to didn't have the right sort of support, didn't have enough time to master that, and is unlicensed. Just have him fly around the country next time you need to fly around the country. Walk the walk.
So, blaming the victim. It's always an awful...
It's not blaming the victim to say, I don't want his unlicensed service, and I want the licensed guy's service. Sorry for the siren.
Spectacle in our society, and it deserves to be called out for what it is. This is Richard Wolff for Democracy at Work.
Yeah, you're watching something that's tailored to lowest common denominator, where the person has to introduce himself either at the beginning or at the end. Yeah, I know who I'm watching, unfortunately, and I probably won't make that mistake too many times in the future. I mean, there's a lot of videos on here that I want to respond to, but this one was just, I think it's one of the worst videos he did, because there's so much that's unsaid. You can actually make, it's never going to be a perfect argument, right? But you can make this argument far better if you actually just, on that educational level, list the specific things that people are interested in, that we should nudge them, like the creative things, and then the other things that can still be construed as creative, but that the state should really have no business in nudging anyone toward. And I've mentioned the examples. There's probably many good examples I can list, but I'll just leave it at that. So I think it ultimately does, unfortunately, reduce back to his commitment to classical Marxism. And the problem with that is there's a lot of technical arguments about that, and of course, classical Marxists believe if you're a non-Marxist, it's proof that you misunderstand. To be a non-Marxist is to misunderstand Marxism, like I said in the last video. But you don't even have to get into the weeds of those highly technical arguments. You have to just look at a central premise of Marxism, the system he swears by. The central premise is that your primary struggle, yours and mine, to the extent that you're not a landlord, to the extent that you're not a financier, to the extent that you're not a kleptocrat or some sort of insider who's amassed a lot of power. You don't get your income from property, you earn your income, intellectually or manually. If you're one of us, right, the Marxist thesis says the primary struggle in your life is class struggle. And if you think it's some other kinds of struggle, you are mistaken. Now, there's a sort of an attempt to caricature Marxists by saying they deny the existence of all other struggles. No. That accusation needs to go away. It's not only the neo-Marxists that play up the other sort of struggles. Classical Marxists can acknowledge the existence of all those other struggles. But what they will deny is that those struggles can be on par with the class struggle, or, heaven forbid, that they can be above. Primary struggle, for all workers, for all non-owners, for all non-bosses, the primary struggle is class struggle. If you think otherwise, you are mistaken objectively. Right? So let's say you got a guy who suffers lifetime of depression. What would the classical Marxist even apply this to him? Like suicidal level depression, has tried to commit suicide numerous times in his life. Would the classical Marxist even say to that guy, class struggle is the biggest enemy you're dealing with? It's not even your chemical imbalance or whatever circumstances that cause you to be depressed. It's class struggle. Would classical Marxists say that? And if you go by their doctrinal convictions, they would have to say that even to him, to the extent that that person is a worker and not an owner. Now, one common retort would be that, well, depression is not something that the political system can fix. And there, I would actually make the sort of argument that he's making when it's misplaced. It very much is something that the system can improve. Because what do depressed people, I'm going to run with a depressed example, what do depressed people usually run into the moment they try to fix their issues pertaining to depression? Well, they usually go on antidepressant meds, and they're still sort of in their infancy. We don't know. It's a trial and error until they actually get the med that works right for them. And sometimes that process lasts a very long time. And oftentimes, people even off themselves during that trial and error process. But if the state had actually funded research in higher droves on antidepressives and other sort of medication to combat these I guess I'll call them natural harms, not systemic harms, natural harms. If we put far more focus on that as opposed to discussing 19th century outmoded economic ideological horseshit, if we actually started paying attention to something like that, something that's causing people to off themselves left and right, and granted in principle that your primary struggle is not necessarily, no matter how poor you are, your primary struggle is not necessarily class struggle. Class struggle might be somewhere, but it's not necessarily at the top. Then we may be more inclined to push for things like, yeah, let's actually fund research in higher droves so that we can actually get this trial and error process when it comes to medication, when it comes to all these other things, we can actually shorten it as much as possible. But they can't grant that because they have to think system first and they have to think top-down fixes first. And it's not just an ideology I disagree with, I think it's a pathology. And it angers me. I know it seems like I'm having fun with this video, but I have to sort of do the fun-having thing to make this video, I guess, somewhat watchable. But honestly, when I watch this, when the recording is off, I fume. This enrages me. So many of the other videos enrage me. The unwillingness to grant that there is no such thing. You cannot apply a primary struggle as a formula that's applicable to multiple persons, let alone all persons of a given class. You can't speak in broad strokes that way. And this is picking up steam. Now, Elizabeth Warren is not good enough on class issues for these people. That's how batshit they are. Elizabeth Warren, who sort of strikes, at least for a country like America, strikes the perfect balance, right? Very much hard on the financial sector. Discusses how bloated it is, how unnecessary it is, but also recognizes, hey, capitalism's existed. For most of capitalism's existence, there was no bloated financial sector, right? And then a couple of decades, yeah, capitalism exists with a bloated financial sector, and it really kind of bastardizes what it was prior to it. Some people call it financialism to distinguish itself from capitalism, and I would say rightly so. But these people, they just want to blend it all. And it disgusts me. So I will point out how disgusted I am by it. It's imprecision fallacy all the fuck over the place. And speaking of imprecision fallacy, here's the 3 things. If we're going to change education, 3 things that I want to see all people taught. Forget the creativity thing. Number 1, statistical literacy. Make better civic agents out of all people, to the extent that they actually learn it and internalize it and remember it. Because statistical illiteracy is the reason we have imprecision fallacy and so many different variants of the imprecision fallacy. It boils down to statistical illiteracy. Teach people about cognitive biases. There's probably hundreds of cognitive biases, but you don't have to go through all. Teach them like about 20. Select 20 of the most common, pervasive cognitive biases and teach them that. Better citizenry. And then finally, teach them about low and high time preferences. And get it in their heads early on that just because everyone in their family or everyone in their peer group might have low time preferences, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's best for them. They may have embedded psychologically different types of time preferences. And it's amazing just how few people are aware of this. And they actually end up thinking that whatever they're conforming to doesn't match up, doesn't align with their time preferences. And so that's like 3 big things that I would start with. And you can do it with, I'm not saying, I said a second ago, don't do the creativity thing. You can do it, but it should still be on the back burner. These 3 things should come first. And as far as I understand, that's not exactly taught. That you're lucky if you get that taught, and like a bit of that in grade 12 or something. But it needs to start much earlier in high school, if not in elementary school. So, and I will tack on some other stuff, unless I choose not to, because this has gone on for too long.